Thanks, everybody. It was, I guess, about 16 years ago that I interned here at Park. And I got to bump into somebody who had introduced me to Stu Card just a couple weeks ago in Muir Woods. And I said, oh, thanks, Herb. That was really the start of something great. And what I'm going to be talking about tonight is how to use behavioral economics as a way to drive a certain box of tools that you can adapt when you're thinking about designing for a good experience. Now, probably the term of art that characterizes behavioral economics, and let me just be frank, I'm an experimental psychologist. Most behavioral economists are really psychologists who want to make more money. And that's just how it works. Tonight, what I'm going to be showing you, I think anybody who was a student of Amos Tversky, I took classes with him and then wasn't able to do any research before his life ended abruptly in 1996. But I would say everybody who studied with Amos or with Danny Kahneman is kind of almost a de facto behavioral economist. I'll be telling you a little bit of content about what that means, but the term of art framing is really something that I think Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman introduced as a way of thinking about how you shift context. And they make a very strong analogy. You'll see at several points I'll connect to psychophysics, to the equivalence between a visual illusion and a cognitive illusion. So this is a drawing that was done by Roger Shepard, one of the great cognitive scientists, and also an impressive draftsman. And although you know this is an optical illusion, although you know that they have to be the same size, that knowledge boots you to no end when you think that the top leftmost is bigger. And what I'm going to be showing tonight are a few ways that presentations, modes of interaction, styles of experiencing things can dramatically change the perception of something which, from maybe a logical formulation, is considered to be equivalent. I would say that the behavioral economists Cass Sunstein and Dick Thaler introduced the term choice architect, which is probably a nice way to think about it. When I think about information architecture, I honestly can't understand how you architect information, because information is pre-existing. It would be like if a building architect said that he was a physics architect, and you'd be like, well, how is it that you architect physics? Because physics exists, and if the it exists, then the bit exists too. And I don't really understand how somebody could, with chisel and tongs and Visio diagrams, actually change the structure of information. But choice architect, I think, is actually pretty apposite. Because when we are creating experiences, we get to choose, qua designers, how the sequence of decisions, judgments, and choices will be presented. So this particular presentation shows that there's a way in which enlightened libertarian paternalism is Sunstein and Thaler's term. You can give everybody all the choices on the menu, but you can put your finger on the scale so that they're more likely to eat the broccoli than the French fries. And now let me jump in and talk a little bit more technically about the imp of the perverse. From my perspective, what I want to talk about is all the ways that we're using technology to try and make ourselves do something. And the imp of the perverse was a story by Edgar Allan Poe, where he talked about how no matter what you say you're going to do, that's precisely the one thing you will not be able to make yourself do. And from my perspective, it's better to use the term Moishe Pipik. He lives in my two sons' belly button, and whenever they misbehave, I know that it's not them. I know that it's Moishe, and he's hijacked them for some ulterior purpose. That's right. As one of them puts his finger in his nose to demonstrate, there is no end to the ways in which whatever we say we're going to do, that becomes in many cases, the hardest thing to do. So there's all these formulations. What?
Guilty as charged.
Guilty as charged. I was going to say, if there is somebody here who has just an incredible level of self-mastery, I mean, there are people who treat themselves like robots. I mean, Timothy Ferriss, the 4-Hour Body and the 4-Hour Work Week, seems to be in this master-slave relationship with his own body in such a way that, like, you know, he's like just hitting himself with a scourge and just putting himself through all kinds of things. Anthony Robbins is another glandular disorder of willfulness. But most people, most of the time, understand that if you're trying to do something, there's typically some kind of way to present that to yourself so that you can artfully persuade yourself to be more productive. Now, I kind of modified this Moishe Pipik poster. Some people might recognize that there's a productivity guru's face mapped onto that, but let me not pick out any single one. I mean, David Allen, the father of getting things done, there was a Wired article about how before he got things done, he first got a heroin addiction and pursued that with all the avidness that he later brought to his tickler file. And so nobody sets out to get a heroin addiction, and few of us put on our to-do list, you know, gain 10 pounds a decade every decade after college. But what I'm going to be shifting towards now is talking about ways that psychology and economics illuminate techniques that we can use to masterfully get ourselves aligned with the vision that we would like to be. So certainly there's a joke about, you know, econs, and then there'll be a picture of Spock. And then Dan Ariely, you know, flashes up a picture of Homer Simpson as a much more likely candidate for what humans are really like. For me, I think our inner Snoid, if people remember him from R. Crumb's comics, is probably as good an incarnation of the imp of the perverse as I could find. And whatever we tell ourselves, we really have to recognize that we are largely strangers to the impulses and motivations that cause us to do the things we do. And what I'll be talking about for the rest of this presentation is ways that understanding the paradoxical quality of our volition and the things that prime us and the things that trigger us can enable a more fruitful relationship that would create an opportunity for somehow having a harmonized marriage between two systems that Danny Kahneman has articulated. System one is the fast judging system. It's the one that when I asked you, you know, which of these little men is bigger, instantly tells you by virtue of the cues and the way that you're wired, it gives you for free all kinds of useful information. System two is somewhat lazy, but is capable of doing deliberate calculations and computations. A diagnostic test that's good for finding out how awake your system two is to ask people, a ball and a bat cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? And there's just an instant answer that pops to your head. And I will not quiz you, but I will tell you that over half the Princeton undergraduates and over half the Stanford undergraduates come up with the instantaneous and free answer that a ball must cost a dime, because you know it costs $1 more than the bat. Or rather, the bat costs $1 more than the ball. But if you add a dime plus $1.10, you end up with $1.20. And that instantly gives you a sense that there's a lot of people who are flying along on autopilot. And I'm not going to be articulating a lot about System 1 and System 2. It's a useful scheme for thinking about things. There's certainly a whole bunch of ways that you can use it. For tonight's talk, instead of doing that, I'm just going to show some findings, highlight how they're relevant to interaction design, and then present ways that technology can leverage the insights of what people really are like in order to more effectively dovetail the requests that the technology is making of us and the self that's responding to those requests. So can we make ourselves get things done? And there is a certain echo chamber here. Late at night when I'm preparing this talk, I have to ask myself, can I make myself get this done? But in my dissertation, which I'll be presenting some of the research from, I did reference this pretty famous instance now of what's called structured procrastination. John Perry is a philosopher at Stanford, and he said, the way to get things done is to always have a long enough to-do list that you'll never, ever do the number one thing. But while you're evading your top requirement, you will be able to mow through items 2 through 5. And the productivity of evading your most important objective is the flywheel that has enabled him to be the productive, tenured, multi-published philosopher that he is. And I would present to you that that kernel of an insight is one that can enable us to think about how we present tasks and demands to ourselves. Another way of thinking about this, and certainly there's a lot of enthusiasm for B.J. Fogg's frame of thinking about it. He's done a lot of really interesting stuff. I would say that what he's trying to do is bring the action down to absolute epsilon, can you floss one tooth? Can you touch your running sneakers? And certainly that's a way of doing it, but for what I'm thinking about, I'm going to be presenting a completely different way of thinking about it. Now, what I want to start with is something that kicked off my own dissertation research. I remember taking a seminar with Al Bandura, and he's just a titan of infomore voracious processing. So his books typically review vast amounts of the literature and demonstrate how it all can be structured in such a way that it implies that Al Bandura's theory of self-efficacy is true. And I'm not going to be talking about self-efficacy, but I do want to say that in the book that I guess came out in '98, we were having a summer seminar. 20 students were in the class, and we had just read chapter 3, I think, which was all about goal setting. And there's just an enormous literature demonstrating that if you set goals, you will be more productive. If you set specific challenging goals, you will be even more productive. And there's just so many applications to that, so many different instances of the effectiveness of goals, that you pretty well have to agree that goal setting is a powerful technique. So before the seminar started, after we had just reviewed the entire literature, I said, do you mind if I just ask a couple questions? And so the question I wanted to ask, intro, is is there anyone who has problems with this literature? And everybody's thinking, no, this is pretty compelling. But the question which sparked my dissertation was, has anyone in this class set a new goal now that you know you have this magical tool that will give you more of whatever you want? With a p-value of 0.05, there was 1 out of the 20 people who had, and just to be frank, it was not me. And I came to think, well, if goal setting is a useful technique, what will enable us to access that technique? We've demonstrated that it will be useful, but what will help us to set the goals that will help us? So the first thing I did was try to get an inventory of people's goals. And what I found out is that people tend to not set goals for the things that are most important. So in the design that I had set up, I asked people to rank order these 10 domains of life. There was academics, because these are Stanford undergraduates, and academics, social life, spirituality, professional development, family connections. So there were these 10 areas, and then I asked, in your topmost domain, whatever it was, tell me what goals and steps you've mapped out. And for the second, third, and fourth domains, what goals have you done around that? What I found was that if somebody rated academics as their top domain, they were systematically and significantly less articulate about that than if a different person had rated academics as their fourth priority. So the general phenomenon, and I see some people trying to wrap their heads around this, is that the lower the priority it is, the more likely you are to be able to articulate and develop plans. And I labeled this the Delmore effect because I was reading the collected essays of Delmore Schwartz. Not many people will know who he is, but he's famous to me. I was looking at my old lecture notes, and first time I heard Amos speak, he said, you know, existentialism, according to Delmore Schwartz, just means that nobody else can take a bath for you. And Delmore Schwartz was a very promising poet and writer at the beginning of the 20th century. And then he spiraled out and was, you know, one of the great lost talents. So in the collection of essays that was published posthumously, the editor said, there's nothing in this set of essays about James Joyce, but the reader should not conclude that Joyce was irrelevant to Delmore. Rather, it was that he was planning to write a major work on Joyce and consequently never wrote anything. And if that phenomenon is relevant to you, then, you know, no. Poor guy. So I labeled this phenomenon the Delmore effect just because I was repeatedly finding that people were able to be more articulate about low priority aspirations. And the evil demon of goals is that the things that you do set goals for are the things that you will get done. And to the extent that something's too precious, too squishy and sensitive for you to set goals, you will pretty much not make any kind of headway there. So in order to finish my dissertation, I couldn't just document this phenomenon. I had to develop a manipulation that would somehow make a difference. The first thing that I thought, and there was a whole bunch of people doing what were called self-affirmations. So I thought, okay, what if you go through an exercise and you think about previous successes you've had? So people were led through an exercise where they say, what's your most important domain? We'll use athletics as an example for right now. There are some people who have that. And they would say, think back in the past on some previous success you've had and write a paragraph about how you've done in this area in the past. And so that kind of manipulation is expected to sort of give you like a little boost. And then I thought, okay, now we'll go through the exercise and see if people can be more articulate. Now, what happened, as you can see over here on my left, is that it actually aggravated the problem. It made it worse. And without having galvanic skin response or anything, my own hypothesis was that it's actually a heightened sense of performance anxiety, because you think, well, I was great in the past. Now, am I able to be that good again? And I don't actually have an account for why that happened, but I do have these results. I also found that distracting people wasn't an effective way to get them to be able to be planful about the most important things. But as you know from my introduction, I was able to finish, and that did mean that I found a manipulation that worked. And that manipulation was to get people to articulate a success in their second most important domain. So if the example is athletics is your most important and social is your second, then if you think about how you've been able to overcome certain kinds of social barriers, or you've been effective at reaching out to people and maintaining your social network, then you have this amplified sense of some area in which you are effective. Then you go through the exercise, and rather than think, can I maintain this? Can I keep it up? You actually say, can I deploy the same level of competence in a related domain? And it was the only manipulation that I came across where people were finally able to be as articulate about their most important goals as about things that were less important. Now, what's the relevance to interaction designers? I would say that there's just almost every single app or site that's designed to help you immediately starts with, what are you trying to do, and can you tell us? Now, given that the ambitious self is something that's squishier than a coelacanth, it's just to have that be the first thing that's raised is front-loading something that's cognitively demanding, and as my results show, is less likely to tap into your full capacity to be articulate. I want to amplify this by saying that there's lots of ways and lots of findings that show that people are strangers to themselves. This is a kind of favorite finding about, this used to be called the battle with your Netflix queue. That you would ask for Netflix to send you a couple of discs. One would be Meg Ryan, and one would be some documentary about, I don't know, Restrepo, like just a feel-bad movie about Afghanistan. And then you keep watching the junk, and the nutritious, hearty, but feel-bad film was continually neglected. Now, in this particular setting, people ask, what kind of movie do you want to watch in 2 weeks? People say, Schindler's List. I'm not going to watch Meg Ryan. And then if you say, what about next week? Then you have sort of an awareness that, I'd still like to see Schindler's List. And then on the night of, you say, okay, you can watch whatever you want. You say, I still want to watch Schindler's List 2 weeks from now. And so people are in this continual kind of collision between what you say you want and what you choose. And I'll be highlighting ways in which that can be deployed both for effective resolutions of certain kinds of quandaries, but essentially we have to recognize that there's loads of opportunities where the assumption is if you make a choice, then you're the best predictor of what you want. And there's tons of research showing that often you'd be better off if a stranger or some third party just told you what you should do. Now, what is the way for interaction designers to solicit preferences? How are we going to get this information? Well, first and foremost, I believe that it should be something that's ancillary rather than a frontal question. To the extent that you can interact in a very light way and collect information, the request, and tell me what are you going to do with the rest of your life, never needs to come up. You can also envision transforming something. I work in financial services, and typically to help people in any kind of financial advisory role, you have to get them to reveal what their risk tolerance is. And the truth is there's scads of these, and they all look the same. There are these 10 questions about, like, how would you feel if you started with $100,000 and the next morning you woke up and you only had $50,000? And so, there's 10 of these, and they're sure to stultify, all but the most willful people. So I can say as a fact that, there are online brokerages that are providing advisory services for free to over 1 million customers, and that the percent of those customers who've availed themselves of this free and valuable service is under 1%. So it's something that people know they should do, but it's also something that people never do. Schwab is another instance of a company where they have an options site for helping people who have restricted stock units or employee stock purchase plans or stock options. And what they published about 2 years ago was that they had provided a free 1-hour session with a financial advisor to anyone who was in the plan. And they had hundreds of thousands to over 1 million customers. I don't know exactly what it is in that area, but what they published was that less than 10% of the people ever took advantage of that. And I think it's just recognized that if the solution to our problems requires the decision to address our problems, then we're dead, because we just aren't going to get around to articulating and confronting things in a way that requires 10 minutes of solid, concentrated thinking. Now, when I was putting this talk together, I said, in a certain sense, what Facebook and Path and Angry Birds is apparently also one of the culprits of helping you by uploading your entire iPhone contacts database so that at some later point in time, they'll be able to make friendly suggestions about who you might want to connect with. And Facebook is the repeat offender here. And yet, because we're in this kind of battered spouse relationship with Facebook, each time they say, we did violate your privacy. But it enables you to have pictures of your friends on your Android phone, which is a utility. And I'm sorry that I, ransacked your Google Mail to find out who you knew, and yet, aren't you happy now? And I think it really is something where, when I articulate this in terms of just what a squirmy and obstreperously difficult to deliberate self we have, it's quite plausible that we can't opt in, we can't say yes, but if these companies continue to thieve us and then provide us with a little bouquet of services that are on the upside of having ransacked. They go, look, I went into your refrigerator and made you dinner. And you're like, wow. And you're like, okay, well, I'm hungry. And, I don't have an answer to that, but I would just say that the lack of intentionality, the lack of deliberateness about what we do puts us in a situation where it almost invites this kind of violate and then request forgiveness dynamic that we're seeing right now. So I want to talk a little bit more about how we might understand preferences. How many people are familiar with ELIZA? Okay, so about probably half, and for the half that aren't, it's pretty simple to say. It's a chat bot, but it was a chat bot when there wasn't chat and when bot wasn't a word. It was invented by Joe Weizenbaum in the late 60s at the MIT CS lab, and it just used certain kinds of syntactic properties to mimic a Rogerian therapist. So you'd say, I hate my advisor, and it would just mimic back, tell me more about your advisor. And the thing that Weizenbaum noticed was that the grad students who knew that it was running about just an ant's brain worth of code, and they knew exactly how little computational complexity was in, would still sneak off and talk to ELIZA late at night because of the sense of being understood. And the truth is, ELIZA stands as a instructive guide to thinking about how you might be able to elicit an engaged reaction that gets people to tell you more about their preferences. Now, I do want to mention the bad boy of your helpers. Clippy lived for 10 years and was incredibly computationally zorched up relative to Eliza. And yet, maybe there's some place, somewhere, some kinky alt.net group where people are fans of Clippy. But I don't think that there's more than 5 people in the world who wanted to talk to Clippy. And so that stands as a kind of negative example of like how pesky it can be, and how it's important to think, okay, if we're trying to sustain a dialogue, how do we create the impression that it's about you rather than about Clippy? What I want to highlight is that there are just this explosion of feedback methods that are going to transform our dialogue with technology. I don't think I have to really rehearse all of this. I go to a lot of the quantified self meetings, and it's just amazing what level of intelligence is going to be embedded in a smartphone. Smartphones are just super smart. You can put your finger on the camera lens, and it will tell you your heart rate. And that's an early thing. I saw the other day that there's a little attachment that only costs $2, and it would enable people in developing countries to get full optometrist quality eye exams, so that you are going to be able to get a lot of information. Galvanic skin response is going to be easy. Heart rate is pretty good. I want to mention Afdex Affectiva, which if you go to their website, it's Rosalind Picard of the Media Lab has spun out this company. And once you enable Flash to spy on you through your video camera, you can watch a Super Bowl commercial. And in real time, what it's going to do is look at your pupil dilation, look at your zygomatic muscles, look at your gaze, look at the position of your face, and extract a real-time signal that afterwards shows you how funny you thought the commercial was, how confusing, how happy you were. And that's the kind of Clippy that we have to look forward to. Is just this little spy that's just going to watch us all day long and continually suggest things. Now, I kind of got ahead of myself. While I was preparing this talk, I read Danny Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And if you're interested in this field, there isn't a better book. When I read a lot of, on Goodreads, the reviews indicate that I'm maybe a little atypical, because most people go, this may be a good book, but I am not a good person, because I cannot make my way through it. But I found that it was a brilliant synthesis of the entire field. And one of the things that I realized is if you think back to this System 1, System 2, Danny Kahneman incarnates System 1. He really has this incredible understanding of illusion, of semantic similarities, of the way that I remember one time hearing him give a talk about how reliably between raters you can get people to say whether Paris is warmer than or redder than New York City. You can ask all kinds of weird questions, and yet people have a kind of structure in their associations that's sufficiently robust that you can get it. So System 1, as I said, would be Danny Kahneman. He really understands a lot about associations, priming, about the kind of visceral reactions that we have. And one of the really moving things about his book is that Amos Tversky died suddenly when he was 59, and Amos Tversky was System 2 incarnate. When I was looking back at some of the papers that Amos wrote, they were often, super terse, incredibly precise. And I remember once hearing a psychologist say that he had a conversation with an economist, and the economist said to me, I measure the IQ of most psychologists in millitverskis. And so most people did feel that Amos was like 1,000 times smarter than almost anyone they'd ever met. What all of this is about right now is that Kahneman mentioned in his book that attention and performance, which is available as a free download on his website, was a book that he worked on at the same time that he was doing the initial collaboration with Amos. And it's a fascinating book because one of the things that it's talking about is just how can you get a measure of cognitive load? And what you can use is pupil dilation. And in fact, what they did when they were running the original experiments was they had a camera that projected outside the room the participants' pupil on the wall, and then they would give them tasks like, a standard task would be like a subtract 3. So, you're supposed to count through a sequence of digits, but each time I give you a digit, like 1987, you're supposed to subtract 3 from that. So it requires a little bit of effort. And then they go, subtract 17. And they'll see that the pupil dilates. And then they say, multiply by 43. And then they'll see that the pupil just goes back to the regular thing. And then they would say, oh, that was too hard. Why did you give up? And then people would be like, hey, how did you know I gave up? And they'd be like, we have a window into your soul, which is that to the extent that something is cognitively engaging, you will get a measure of the level of computation that you're engaged in by the dilation of your pupil. And when you couple that kind of understanding to the fact that the quantified self is going to just create this panoply of attentive signal detectors, you start to think about how much power there's going to be in presenting things to people at exactly the right time. A part of the literature that I'm not very familiar with, which is reviewed in Kahneman's new book, is just how being in a good mood actually can improve your accuracy and your ability to detect, faint signals. And so, there's various ways that you can do it. You can catch somebody who's in a good mood, or in other circumstances, they'll have them hold a pencil between their teeth in such a way that it's actually extending your zygomatic muscles, and that will make you in a slightly better mood, and that will make you a little bit better at processing things. So again, interaction design, what's going to happen here? I think what it is it's going to drive the attentive development of tools that are going to be coupled to true predictors of attention and capacity. So I'm not going to talk about this because next month, Michael Tuman is going to be coming down from James Landay's lab. He gave a talk at the last Chi using mechanical Turkers, and I'm going to have him give that whole talk. So I'm not going to talk too much about that tonight, just to say next month come back and you'll hear that there are ways that you can actually have these, these labor pools of people doing tiny little tasks. And based on whether the UI is delightful or annoying, you will get a segregation in the market, and people will charge you more to do a task on an ugly UI. And so you can kind of extract out of that what the utility of a beautiful UI is. The fight for self-control, which is my theme. Bernstein's rats were endlessly studied, but this is a story I know from Dan Ariely rather than from the papers, but I'm going to follow up on this. But a rat can push one lever and it gets a small pellet right away. But if it goes for that small pellet, then the lever that requires a delay and gets a much bigger pellet is inactivated. And so the rat is in this position where it knows through experience that the big lever has the big payoff, but it can't resist the little payoff right now. So they continually go for the quick fix, and they go, oi, again I ate the little pellet. Oi, I did not get the big pellet. And then the thing is the rat cannot not touch the pellet because it's, and if anybody has checked their email while they were trying to get something more important done, you know what that little pellet tastes like. So, but what's interesting is that you can introduce a third lever which disables the quick fixer. And the rat will push that. And then it'll be like, now I'm out of my league. I cannot cheat on myself. I have blocked myself from going for the quick fix. And it's almost uncanny to think that, rats are smarter than people there. because they're able to choose to turn off the quick fix so that they'll be capable of waiting for the big pellet to come down. Now, what I want to talk about a lot is automating choice. And certainly, as I frame this as choice architecture, I want to say, you know what? Let's think about subscriptions a little bit, because I think it's a really useful tool. There's a lot of ways in which we understand, subscribing to things in order to make it something that, reduces the friction and increases the likelihood. Gym membership actually has its own behavioral economics. There's a couple of people who've devoted pretty much their research to studying gym memberships and how people pretty much only participate for the first month of an annual dues. And then there's a little app called Gym Pact that you can sign up for. It's only active, I think, in Boston and maybe LA. But what you do is you pool money and you pay it in, and then if you go to the gym, you can pull out of that. And then everybody who doesn't go to their gym is basically paying you, because they've forfeited their claim to getting the money back. So it's a device for trying to motivate you by, to me, it reminds me of this joke I remember hearing about somebody who drops a dime into an outhouse, and then he throws a $20 bill. He says, there's no way I'm going down there for a dime. And it's just like, I don't really understand how that works, but the Gym Pact is, asking for you to pony up more money that you can get back if you only do what you say you're going to do. Amazon intimately understands how you want to make things friction-free. So Amazon Prime is one way. And then second independent channel is that you can subscribe to things. If you buy diapers, then it's immediately saying, look, you get 15% off. This is something you're probably going to buy again. Why don't you just put it on a subscription plan? And they're clearly attuned to the fact that one decision unit should be coupled to as many consequences as possible, because there's just a lot of reasons to believe that it's quite hard for us to make any decisions. Medical insurance is another good example where a rational approach would be to have a very high deductible and a low premium. So you just say, oh, I'm only paying $80 a month. That's only $1,000 a year. And true, the first $5,000 that I have to pay is going to be out of my pocket. But it's a lot cheaper than paying $500 a month and only paying $10. So if you do the math, you'll see that that's true. But people, even if you spell out to them, look, you could save money by having a much more coarse plan, people would say, you know why I don't want to do that? It's because every time I'm sick, I don't want to spend an hour consulting, should I pay, should I stay, should I go? And so people actually are willing to pay extra to be spared the cycles of evaluation of should you or shouldn't you. And this, I think, is why to date there hasn't been any kind of micropayment, because there's no such thing as a little decision. You can ask my wife. So, it's straining to make any kind of decision. And so the idea is should I pay 1/10 of a cent to read this article? Is going to cognitively demand more than 1/10 of a cent of your own cycles to decide whether to spend or not. I think I'm going to skip the endowment effect, because I want to move towards this, the diminishing returns. And this is actually a law from psychophysics. How many people have this tattooed on their shoulder or otherwise are familiar with it? The Weber-Fechner law is just a generalization in psychophysics that you have this diminishing sensitivity, and typically it's a log level intensity. So decibels is a great example, where in order to double the loudness of a sound, you actually have to increase the physical intensity by 10 times. And it's the same with brightness. It's the same with tastes. It's a very ubiquitous phenomenon, because it enables you to compress sensitivity across a very large range by having this diminishing sensitivity. From an economics point of view, this is typically the story that if you have no money and you find $1, you're very happy. But if you have $100,000 and you find $1, then you're quite up there on the flat side of the curve, and it doesn't really make that much difference. So how's this relevant to interaction design? Well, look at it this way. There's one way that games play with our framing of an experience so that they manage to convert something which is just an infinitely long slog, Farmville in hell for the rest of eternity. And then they slice it into little things where each time you transition past a certain point, you reset to 0. So the whole idea of leveling up here is that instead of seeming like you're in this long, insensitive thing, you keep changing the context. You're at 0, you move up a little, and then you go until you're habituated, and then they move the level to another place. That enables you to continually reset to 0, get you to that place where you're very sensitive. And that is a technique that's relevant for all kinds of tricks. And as I was analogizing with subscriptions, you can think that that's another thing where like what you're trying to do is just push all your decisions up to that flat part of the curve, rather than have, if you didn't have insurance but you had a big bank account, and sit there and every single time say, should I spend $150? Now, here's another relevant dimension. This is a kind of intertemporal fact that, again, you can say that there's two people who inhabit your life. There's the person in the now, and then there's the person who looks back. And if you look at yourself that way, then there's an experiencer and there's a rememberer. Now, what's interesting is that our mind is not making a movie. It's really just taking snapshots. And the consequence of that from a behavioral perspective is that there are some things that are almost instantaneously evident to us. In this example, the visual image, it's very easy to see that those two bars, they could be Montessori bars or whatever, are about the same height. But the third one, which is flat, you can't, for the life of you, know whether it would stack up to be the same. I mean, you could sit there, do a little bit of measurements, but your perceptual system is not giving you that for free. So what Danny Kahneman noticed was that there's certain things, like the peak intensity, that are easy to remember. But other things, like the average, which are not in any way stored and aren't easy to retrieve. So if you can imagine riding a roller coaster, you could definitely say, what was the highest point? But if somebody said, well, what was the average height that you were on during that roller coaster ride? You would have no way of accessing that. It's not something that you could derive from experience. Now, this isn't just like some kind of anomaly. It actually has a really relevant implication. So the thing is, here's two people having a painful medical procedure. Patient A has this that goes on and ends within under 10 minutes. Patient B, as you notice, has a much longer profile, over 20 minutes. And if we were performing an integration of the sum of the units of pain, it's transparent that patient B has worse experience. But remember, there's the experiencing self and then there's the remembering self. And the remembering self is the one who's making decisions. With this particular painful medical procedure, it turns out that it's something that has to be done once a year. And rather than running an integral, Danny Kahneman articulated that you're probably just remembering two things: the peak moment of pain and the last moment of pain. And what you'll notice about Mr. B, or Mrs. B, is that the last moments are much lower than they are in patient A. Now, that's not simply something about integrating over the area of the curve. It's demonstrated to be the case that people are much more likely in situation B to agree to have the procedure the following year. And in fact, it's so compelling that medical protocols have been changed to add pain, but add it at a lower volume than was at the peak moment. And by giving people a smoother gradient at the end, they have a remembered experience of the suffering, which makes them feel like this was bearable, I could do it again. So how is this relevant for designers? The last moment is inordinately important. I mean, you can imagine that, like, all of us can say that about the Matrix movies. They were great right until they ended, and then, something happened. The other thing I can say is that you can transform an experience where there may be some part that's just, intrinsically annoying by adding a pleasant extra bit. Dropbox spiffs new users. They say, you get 2 gigs, you sign up, and then they go, hey, here's a gift. Here's an extra 250 megabytes. And you're like, wow, thank you. And Jared Spool, about 9 years ago, noticed that people's perceptions of how long it took to load a page were almost orthogonal to the actual length of time. And what really determined whether you thought a page loaded fast or slow was whether after it loaded, it had what you were looking for. And that's the final bit, right? It's like you kind of fuzz out on whether it was 3 seconds or 9 seconds, but you look at the page and you go, bingo, got what I wanted. So choice overload is the last thing that I think I'm going to have time to talk about. How many people are familiar with this experiment, which was done in Menlo Park at Draeger's? Okay, so I'd say maybe a sixth of the audience. I think this is the most famous experiment of the 21st century. What happened, if anybody has been to Draeger's, you'll know that they do have the mustard aisle, and they have the jelly aisle, and they have, with jams and jellies, they have over 400 kinds. And so Sheena Iyengar set up a booth in Draeger's, and alternate hours, you could either choose from 24 or 6 jams and jellies. And everybody who came and got a taste, they could taste as many as they wanted, they were given a coupon. She's very rigorous methodologically, so she actually, matched flavorfulness of the 24 with the 6, so there wasn't anything like that. But when people could choose from 24, 3% of the people redeemed the coupon. Any guess on what the redemption rate was when you had a much smaller set? 30%. Yes, it is 30%. Yeah. Even if you didn't know it, you did know it, right? And the thing is, at first it seems like this is just about jams, yada, yada, yada. But then Sheena went on to study 401k participation. And this is like, a billion here, a billion there, it starts to end up being real money. And what she demonstrated is the more choices you have, the lower your likelihood of participating. I could talk about defaults, but I'm going to skip over that. I kind of realized that in putting this talk together, I realized, wow, I could actually teach a whole course on this, because there's just so much here, and I'm not trying to pack a whole course in. But let me say that when we recognize that people are really ambitious in the future, but then really lame on the execution, you can say, okay, well, how can we help you? And Dan Ariely released the procrastinator application. And so you say, okay, I need to pick a gift for my mom by 3 days before Mother's Day. And then if you haven't chosen, it chooses for you. It just says, okay, flowers for mom, boom, and it's done. And the thing is, we try and do this to ourselves, but it's clearly going to be something where we delegate more. And analogous with financial services, it's not. Actually, I can say, having recently started at a different financial services company, the law has changed so that now it is automatic opt-in for 401k, so you have to opt out. And given that you're opting in automatically and you have to choose to check a box to take yourself out, if you don't even check a box in terms of the allocation, it automatically lines you up with the age-appropriate indexed fund. So there is a lot that can be done inside the paternalism of a corporate relationship where you're an employee. That's possible. Outside of that, where you're actually just giving people a service and you can't do the Facebook thing to them, you can still run simulations where you say, you could have done X. I recommended it a month ago and you haven't done it, but here's the consequences of your not having done the reallocation of your portfolio or something like that. So you can show things. And the relevance to designers is that we really have to recognize that choices are pain points. I heard that McKinsey has this rule of 3, which is, when they're talking to, these gnat brain CEOs that have, enormous responsibilities but very little attention, they never present a slide with more than 3 choices on it. So, it's like, mama bear, papa bear, baby bear. And then, the CEO goes, papa bear. And then they show Papa bear in leather, Papa bear in suede, Papa Bear in blue jeans, and so you have the capacity to hierarchically reveal more detail that enables people to make decisions without seeing the entire bonanza. A really useful motto that I heard here a long time ago, Rob Hitani, who was the designer of the Palm, said, sometimes you're forced for whatever reason to, have a checkbox on every little square, like, yes, we do export to, this ridiculous little function, or yes, we interface with this, and and somebody's looking at a box and at egg software, and they go, oh, this one has lots of check marks, and this one has fewer check marks, and I'll get the one with more check marks. That's the scenario that marketing is going through. He said, well, if that's true, and you do have to do it for brochureware, competition, provide but hide. So that means if there is a lot of functionality that's, competitively demanded, it doesn't have to be on the surface. It could be somewhere that requires somebody actively seek it out. And I'm going to end here by talking just a little bit about this, which is the synthesis of, pretty much, this is what Danny Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for, was this curve. And so you'll recognize here, this is the Weber-Fechner curve, which is just like a diminishing sensitivity as you go up. This is in the realm of gains. But what was added by Amos and Diane was that there's a completely different shape on losses. So what they noticed is, like, if I say, would you take a gamble where, heads you win $1 and tails you lose $1? Most people will be like, no. And then you say, okay, now would you take a gamble where heads you lose $10, tails you lose, $1? What happens, because losses are more aversive than gains are rewarding, is that a phenomenon occurs that causes people to be risk impulsive in the realm of losses, where a certain small loss is so bad that you're willing to gamble to try and avoid it. So I think it would be pretty hard for me to compress everything about prospect theory. And I feel like I've kind of gone on about a lot of different things. I wanted to whet your palate. I am going to go through a little bit more here, but this is my last slide. This is the actual curve. The previous page was my stylized version. This is actually out of the paper from 1979, Econometrica. Looks pretty similar. The other thing that I want to point out about this is that right around the origin, one of the things that they introduced was that you have a bias to stay in the status quo, so that around your original position, you're less likely to want to move. And that, as I mentioned, the opportunity to make a gain is less attractive to you than the fear of having a loss. So one of the ways that that's actually been rolled up into an actual architected choice is Dick Thaler created Save More Tomorrow, which was approved by Congress in about 2007. And basically what it enables you to do is, instead of allocating from your current salary anything into your retirement fund, you can just agree that in the future when you get a raise, you'll give up a big chunk of that. Now, think of it this way. It's a future gain, so what do I care about it? It's nothing. I don't want to lose anything I have right now. Right now I know, I'm making this amount of money and I'm spending exactly that amount of money plus epsilon. And the thing is, that you're, currently going to feel a loss that hurts if you have to put anything into savings. But miraculously, future gains aren't really that attractive to you. They're not nearly as likely to hook into you as a current loss. So the Save More Tomorrow fund enables you to just agree in advance that when I get my next raise, I will put 60% of that into my 401k. It's money that was never mine, and now it's money that's going towards my own benefit. Now, as I had mentioned at the beginning, partly we are strangers to ourselves in ways that lead us to make decisions where we're like, oh, I don't want to, I said I wanted to wake up at 7, but now it's 6:59. I don't want to wake up at 7. And yet, in certain scenarios, it's possible to architect the range of choices in such a way that you can get people to be quite enlightened about their long-term self-interest, as long as you frame it as something that's going to start happening in the distant future. And to the extent that you create opportunities for people to be more intelligent, more self-consistent, and more aligned with their long-term interests through these kinds of devices, it's possible for us to imagine a happier, more harmonic future. So, consequences for designers. One of the things is like, it's possible to show too much data. And I remember Amos Tversky said that he didn't actually read student evaluations. He just looked at the aggregated sum. Just said, do they, and I was thinking, wow, I knew he was going to win a Nobel Prize. And I was like, Amos Tversky can get hurt feelings by a Stanford undergraduate? And he'd say, yeah, because, like there'll be some comments where they go, yeah, this guy seems to know his stuff. But then there'll be some little smart aleck Stanford student who just like throws a barb and it lands. And so you think, one negative comment has more harm than, 5 or 10 praised comments. In the parallel of like the marriage literature, John Gottman is somebody who claims that you have to have a 5-to-1 ratio. That for every negative comment that a couple is exchanging, you should make sure that there's 5 positive comments. And I think that's not quite the same curve as the prospect theory curve, but it does indicate that the negative has a preponderance that it should not be assumed that you can have a 1-to-1 match and have that be equilibrated. So, what does behavioral economics offer for interaction design? I hope through these examples, I've kind of shown that behavioral economics can promote experimentation. I didn't talk explicitly about Eldar Shafir's research, but let me just tell you, people have a hard time with uncertainty, and they tend to evade making decisions when there's any kind of open information that they don't yet have. So given that, I've noticed, just observationally, the quantified self is a community of people who are, data narcissists collecting loads and loads of information about themselves. But in spite of the fact that it's a real dedicated, bleeding edge community, there aren't that many people who are doing experiments. And the framework for doing experiment is different than, just saying, how many times you peed over the summer. It actually has to require identifying something that you're going to randomize and then look at what the impact of that is. So I believe that there will be a role for people who design experiments for other people. I really don't think that we're all going to be experimenting on ourselves. I really think that there's a small group of people who do understand experimental design. I think it's going to be larger and larger. I feel confident that the opportunities are so compelling. And I do believe that our revealed preferences are going to be constructed in a dialogue with this experimentally rich, informative stream of data, and that the union of empiricism and sensitive technology creates exciting vistas for interaction designers. So thank you. Any questions?
Fantastic talk.
Thank you.
So there's a lot of very powerful techniques you're talking about that really kind of get inside people's heads more. And especially in the financial services area, there's the power comes with responsibility. Mm-hmm. So I hate to ask this, but the sort of the flip side of all this is, getting people to rush into a 401k or whatever the current paradigm is, which may or may, pre-2007 or whatever.
Help people buy houses.
Help people buy houses, right? The herd mentality, either way of that, it's a very volatile. Mm-hmm. So how would, as a sort of
you mean, what's the ethical implications
of ethical as an interaction designer, what do you do with that?
Okay, so, I think that's been a question about, any technique that influences people. And, what I remember hearing Amos Tversky say was that, he said, there's nothing we're studying that used car salesmen don't already know. They just don't have decimal point on the correlations. They're doing everything to, you know, influence and affect people. And so it's not like there's, you know, some evil genius cooking up new ideas. Side note, one of my favorite people, if there were like, you know, a baseball card collection of, you know, researchers, then Lex Luthor card would go to this guy, Andrew Carr. I don't know if he was at Stanford Research Institute, and he was the evil genius behind the balance transfer in a credit card, because before the balance transfer was developed, credit card companies had this problem where half their customers were, you know, exploiting the credit card float, and they were giving no profitability. The interchange fees weren't a real big part of that at that point, but the credit card companies are like, look, half our customers are paying their balance in full every month, and we're losing money on them. And then the Lex Luthor character in Menlo Park at the time, now he has a chateau in the south of France. But he said, you know what you do is you start a card where in order to open, you have to transfer balance. Then 100% of the people who, you know, open a card are going to be the people who carry balances. So Andrew Carr was not using these techniques. He was a decision theorist. And, you know, I think, you know, you do need your pantheon of, like, evil guys to, and, you know, like, the thing is, Facebook, I think, is doing things that, as I said, just outstrip my own imagination in terms of the way that they're abusing their installed base. And they're not doing it based on psychology. They're doing it based on some kind of canny read that, you know what, they keep coming back. So.
What was it that about defaults that you were going to say that you skipped over there?
Oh, defaults? Just that they're very powerful. And you know, the thing is, this particular study looked at people who were opting in versus people who had to check a box to opt in. And the result was that, as you can see here, you know, participation rates when people were like window is actually where they were given some training. But you know, the truth is, people don't change things. So there's a lot of natural experiments where, you know, I think Pennsylvania has one kind of car insurance, which is no fault by, and the, you know, New Jersey, which is a bordering state, has a different way. But then the really compelling one is the difference in organ donation rates from countries that, you know, automatically opt you in, and then you have to check a box to say, no, I don't want to give my organs. And they have donation rates in the high 90s. And then, you know, matched countries like Sweden and Denmark, I think, differ, but certainly they're, you know, almost the same to people outside. The other country has a opt-in, and then you get participation rates like 13, 14%. So defaults are, you know, incredibly potent. As any interaction designer knows, it's just a fig leaf on a bad UI when you say, well, we'll let people customize it. Because there's nobody, except people who come to these meetings, who's likely to have ever gone through and customized something. Now back here.
Yes. In my experience with goals, if it's linked to something higher, it's more achievable, especially if you look at something like the 12-step programs or, I don't know, super athletes, like let's say Lance Armstrong, or I see a trend that if there's, you know, you're not doing the goal for the goal's sake, there's some higher meaning behind it. People are more likely to reach the goal. Have you looked at that?
I haven't, but I mean, there's lots of, like StickK is a site that enables you to kind of blackmail yourself. You know, like you say, I'm going to lose weight, and if I don't, then you can donate money to Santorum or something like that, you know? Yeah, whatever, the NRA, just whatever your bogeyman is, so that you have, you know, carrot and stick, and, you know, you're kind of like strapping yourself on a railroad track, and you're going, if I lose weight, the train will miss me, you know, and you're like, go for it, you know. So I myself haven't explored those. I was more interested in the context of, like, what I called my dissertation was, you know, midwiving goal articulation. So, helping people who have these things inside themselves give birth to things rather than, I wasn't interested in the insemination of goals. I wasn't trying to make people pregnant with new goals. I was just trying to help them, give birth to the things that were inside them. Oh, here's one.
So Paul, my recent research is in people taking medications regularly, and that behavior that you get your prescription from your doctor, you probably don't even drop it to the pharmacist, and then never get well and go back to the doctor a month later. And because you talked about this inception, and not that, but the change of it, how do you get people to move from that point? Anything you could say about that?
So what that is I think you're talking about the 0th step, right? Which is like, here's step 1, 2, 3, and you're in like Flynn. As I said, BJ Fogg tries to get it down to like just, step 0.001, like as tiny as you can. I have a different take. I think that, it's not that I think those smooth gradients where you make it as small as possible may help, and certainly there's a lot to explore there. But my interest is more in changing the frame of mind that we bring to, because there are lucid moments. Each of us has about 15 moments where, we actually go, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? And like, you and then you go back to sleep. But, but the thing is, what I'm interested in is coupling that moment of lucid decisiveness with the techniques and tools that would enable that to become articulated, supported, and actualized. That's probably a good place to end. So again, I want to thank everybody. If you have any further questions, I'll be around. Thanks so much. Thanks. So fun to see you.